My name is Josh McTaggart. I am Theatre Trust's relatively new Chief Executive Officer. It's a real privilege to be here at this event on my second month in the job. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all. Now, I'm still in an empty room right now, and I know most of us in this digital room are used to live spaces. So I'm going to break the rule for 1 minute and ask everyone to turn their cameras on and just give a wave. You can even turn to the person digitally next to you. Let's just kind of, at least for me, make me feel like I'm in a room full of people I can see on a screen over there. So let's try and create live experience within a digital space. Um, and then as we do that, hopefully new people pop on your screen. You'll see we've got over 140 people in the room, which is amazing. So if we can now ask someone to turn their cameras off, and then we'll see people slowly disappear. It's like a cascade on my second screen over there. So as I said, my name is Josh, and I am Chief Exec here at Theatres Trust. Most people in this room will know, but Theatres Trust was established in 1976 as part of an Act of Parliament. As far as we're aware, we're the only country in the world that has a piece of legislation that commits to the protection of our country's cultural infrastructure, specifically our theatre buildings. And that piece of legislation came about because since the First World War, over 800, up to 1976, over 800 theatre buildings were demolished and no cultural provision was put in their place. And that's what led to the genesis of Theatres Trust. I'd just like to take a moment to dedicate this event today to a man that many of you will be familiar with, John Earl, who was the Trust's first paid director in the position I now hold, who took on the role from 1986 to 1996. And John passed away very sadly last year at the age of 96. He'd served the Trust both as a director, but as a passionate advocate for our theatre spaces. And the shoulders we stand on today as an organisation would not be possible if it weren't thanks to him. So just a real moment to remember the people that have gone before us to champion the incredible work of our theatre spaces across the country. So most of you all know that Theatres Trust is unique, that we are the national public body to support every theatre building across this country, all 1,100 of them. And we're also a statutory consultee for planning, which means that we have a real sense of what's going on up and down the country in theatre buildings, from our amateur dramatic buildings all the way through to our commercial buildings in cities and towns. But not only that, we are a charity that provides free advice to theatres across the country on everything from business planning to sustainability to audience engagement. Although we care passionately about our buildings, we also care more about the people who are in them and how they access them and where buildings and people intersect. So although we focus on our heritage, we also really want to work on how people in our communities can access our buildings to experience the thrill of live performance. But not just communities, but our audiences and our artists and technicians who will be on stage and behind stage, making these live performances a reality for the people engaging with them. Now, I don't need to preach to the people in this room, but it's probably worth us reflecting on why theatres are important in 2025. We hear a lot about placemaking and the role that theatres, the civic role theatres have in creating place for our communities. Especially since the pandemic, we can't underestimate the importance in real space in our local areas where communities can get together, gather, and share stories, whether that's through a play, a musical, or even just gathering together for a cup of coffee in our local area. Also, I've been very fortunate this morning to be talking on radio and TV about the importance of our theatre buildings, and the economic growth is a huge conversation. And I think we must remember that theatre buildings play a role in our local economy and our national economy. And the international renown of our theatre culture is something that is supported by the incredibly intricate ecosystem of our theatre buildings. And as we talk about those buildings that are at risk today, they play a vital role in making sure that ecosystem is strong and representative of our whole country. And also, we are facing a mental health crisis in this country that is undeniable. And research that came out earlier this year shows the arts and culture sector play a huge role in counteracting that and making sure that we prioritize mental health and well-being, especially that of our young people in this country. And I know everyone in this room working with a cultural space, a theatre building, is doing incredible work to make sure the well-being of their communities is prioritised as we move into the future. So as you know, this is the 19th year of our Theatres at Risk Register launch. And during the time since we started the register in 2006, with working with local authorities, operators, and developers, we've been able to steward over 80 buildings that have been at risk of demolition or being mothballed and not reopened, to find a journey to reopening either as a live performance space or as a space for communities to gather and connect. And it feels really pertinent that today Soho Theatre Walthamstow has announced its first programme of live events that will take place later this year. Many of you will know that the formerly known as the Walthamstow Granada in East London was put on our list in 2015 and was taken off the list in 2023. And it's a real brilliant and amazing story to see the journey of that building and the other theatres that have been on the at-risk list that are now back in public use. So the question I've been asked a lot today on radio and TV is, does the list do anything? And I think it's clear. This isn't just a negative news story. This is a campaign that presents an opportunity to promote and amplify the culture on people's doorsteps and make sure we can work together to get those buildings back into public use in whatever form that best serves a local community. So today you'll hear more about the current at-risk register, the 43 theatres that sit on it, which includes, unfortunately, 5 new additions and 1 building that's been taken off the register. Across that list of buildings, there's been real progress, but there is still jeopardy and challenge that I know we'll discuss in our Q&As later today. And I think it's worth noting that beyond the buildings that's on our risk register, 2024 was a challenging year for theatres across the country. And I think it reminded our organisation the important role that we play in making sure that we can support operators, local authorities, and those working within the sector to really think about how we protect these spaces and these organisations for the future of our communities. I know everyone in this room is here because you care about theatre spaces and what they can do for people, as well as artists and performers. So I know there's going to be lots of questions and things you want to contribute. I can already see the chat is alive and well. As Rachel said, please make sure any questions you have burning to ask, we'll try and get to them at the end of the session today. Please send those directly to Michelle, and she will make sure we answer questions that ideally will appeal to everyone in the room. You may have some really specific questions, but we might just take questions that cover more thematic areas to make sure that our question and answers are relevant to everyone in the room. But if you have a specific question, please, as Rachel says, do email us and we can follow up on the more specific cases. We're very fortunate at the end of today, our closing address will be delivered by Sir Chris Bryant, Minister of State for Media, Tourism and Creative Industries, and I'm really looking forward to see what he has to say. And we're beginning today's event with a welcome note from one of our trustees, who unfortunately can't be here digitally in person because she's having a well-earned holiday in between the London leg of her tour of Merchant of Venice 1936. So it's my pleasure to introduce a video from Tracy Ann Oberman, one of our trustees.
Hi, my name is Tracy Ann Oberman. I'm an actress, a writer and a producer. I'm just speaking to you just as I'm about to go on stage to play Shylock in the Merchant of Venice 1936. I wanted to talk about how important regional theatres are. This play, The Merchant of Venice 1936, for example, started off at Watford Palace Theatre, then went to Manchester Home. And then, because of the success of that, it got taken on by the Royal Shakespeare Company and then went on a 13-week tour around the country. And it made me realise, as I always knew, but just through experiencing working in places like Cardiff and Malvern and Chichester and just all over the country. This network of regional theatres is the lifeblood of this country. It's our history and it's our theatrical tradition. And the thing that made me very emotional was seeing how many people were coming out to see our play from all massive demographic, from all walks of life. And, you know, in Bromley and in High Wycombe and Fareham and Southport and Salford Keys and back to Richmond and all over the country, is just how important it was and how much they were really hungry for good quality theatre. And there was something, seeing the wide demographic of people, often very young people coming to see the show, I think but it also might be a musical, but it also might be a piece of Shakespeare like ours, a punchy, short, very accessible piece of theatre. And it just feels so important that these theatres are alive and kicking, because they give a very different experience to kids and to audiences. And I could see through the feedback that we got just how much that theatre experience was needed, that storytelling experience was needed, and also how much they appreciated it and didn't want to have to pay huge amounts of money to go to the West End or to a large city to see these pieces of theatre. I think touring is essential, and I think touring to these theatres are essential. And the numbers of people that were in, selling out everywhere, and seeing how grateful and how people wanted to talk about it afterwards, and to really talk about the play and the issues of the play, made me fully committed to saving these regional theatres as much as we can, and to keeping that network going, because, as I say, it's the lifeblood of this country, and it's where some of the most experimental and brilliant theatre can both come out of, and also we can take that sort of theatre there as well. Not just the musicals and the pantomimes, but all sorts of theatre for a very theatre literate and very hungry audience.
And so big thank you to Tracy Ann, one of our trustees. You may have seen she was backstage there, just about to go on stage as Shylock, the first female Shylock in Merchant of Venice 1936, which will be touring the country. So if it's coming to a venue near you, definitely check it out. And as Tracy Ann says, the regional theatres across this country and the touring productions that we have going to them is so important to our ecosystem. And our hope is that theatres that are on a risk register that will return to public use will play a role in that touring ecosystem, which is so important for bringing young people and people of all ages to engage with the thrill of live performance. Just a slight housekeeping note to let you know that during the next part of our event, there will be a presentation going alongside. You have a bar on your screen with a spotlight speaker, so you can make the speaker bigger or the presentation bigger by clicking and scrolling. So if you want to see bigger presentation, scroll to the right, and then if you want to see the speaker bigger, scroll to the left. So hopefully that makes it more accessible if you're having challenges seeing the presentation. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce one of my colleagues, Claire Appleby, Theatre Trust Architecture Advisor, who's been working tirelessly throughout the year on this programme and will be taking us through the new Theatres at Risk Register buildings, as well as some other wider issues facing our venues. Over to Claire.
Many thanks, Josh, and hello, everybody. As Josh has said, I'm Claire Appleby, and I'm the Architecture Advisor at Theatres Trust. We're going to start a screen share shortly, and the first image on your screen shows all of the 43 theatres on this year's Theatres at Risk Register. Josh has already explained the importance of the Theatres at Risk Register 2025 and why we do it. So I'm going to provide a little more detail, so give you an insight about how we actually compile the register, and also give you some additional detail about those theatres new to this year's register and about the theatre being removed. Those of you who've attended the previous Theatre at Risk Register launch events will know that we do like to share a story about the buildings on our register. So I'm going to finish by sharing with you some pivotal moments from this last year to bring a flavour both of our work and of the immense hard work of the groups supporting and campaigning for these theatre buildings, and hopefully further inspire everyone here to continue to provide your support to the fantastic buildings and important community theatres on our Theatres at Risk Register. So I'm going to start to talk about how we actually compile the register and explain about the criteria that we use when assessing whether a theatre is added, removed, or remains on the list. As a team, we get together annually to review the situation across the theatre sector, and this takes into account those theatres already on the Theatres at Risk Register, alongside those that we support through our advice service or that form part of our planning casework. We carefully consider each case using 3 criteria to assess the theatres, and these criteria cover the immediacy and type of risk that they face, or the risk factor, the quality and significance of the building, so its star rating, and the building's importance to the local community and its potential to return to live performance or community use, or its community value. So the theatres at the top of the list are not just those at greatest risk, they are the theatres of the most architectural, cultural and social value, and the buildings with the most potential to be returned or retained for performance use by their community. To give a little more detail about the criteria, so firstly, looking at that community value. So for a theatre to be on the Theatres at Risk register, there must be local support and community demand for a theatre as a performance venue. And as I've already said, the building must also have that potential to be returned to live performance or community use. The second criteria is the building's star rating, and this credits the building's architectural quality, its workability as a theatre, its social and its heritage value. It also includes a theatre's geographical uniqueness. So, for example, this may be the only theatre provision in that specific area, such is the case for the Roundhouse Theatre in Dover. The star rating is also an important criteria because our register includes theatres that are not statutory listed. So not listed grade 2 star, category A or B. They're buildings that we believe are excellent examples of theatres. So, for example, the Intimate Theatre in the London Borough of Enfield, that is an important and rare survivor of a rep theatre from the inter and post-war years. The third criteria is the risk factor. We assess the level of threat to a building either as a structure or as a theatre operation. So the list will include working theatres with financial or operational issues, such as Thameside Theatre in Grays, Essex. It also includes theatres which are partially open, for example for pop-up events, but require substantial restoration work or financial input to secure their future, such as is the case for the Leith Theatre. And of course, the list also includes those theatres which are vacant and deteriorating. Every building is given a score between 0 and 3 in each of these categories. These scores are then added together to give a total risk score up to a maximum of 9 points. To be included on the register, a theatre must score a minimum of 4 points with at least 1 in each category. With our scoring system of each criteria being ranked between 1 to 3, there does need to be a major change in either the progress being made or the level of threat to a theatre for the scores to change. And there have been some changes this year, increases to the risk factor to reflect a greater threat to the building, for example, as is the case at the Borough Hall in Greenwich, where the new owner has announced their ambition to redevelop the building as a hotel. But there are also cases where the risk factor has decreased, and that's in recognition of significant progress being made to save that theatre, and such is the case for Morecambe Winter Gardens. Further detail on all the theatres on the register, including their scores, can be found on our website. So now moving on to details of this year's list. As I've said, there are 43 theatres on the Theatres at Risk Register 2025, and the map on your screens illustrates the spread of those theatres throughout the UK. So there are 36 in England, 5 in Scotland and 2 in Wales. It also shows the position of the one theatre that we're removing from the Theatres at Risk register, which is marked in orange, if you can make it out on the map on your screens there, and also of the 5 new additions to the 2025 register, which are marked in red. The addition of a building to the Theatres at Risk register is always considered a last resort, so it's for cases where the building is at risk of being permanently lost. Last year, there were 2 new additions to the register, which, as we remarked at the time, may have appeared relatively low. I mean, we were, after all, experiencing challenging times due to the cost of living crisis, rent rises, warnings of local authority cuts, and risks associated with RAC, reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or crumbly concrete as you might know it. Last year, we were hopeful that solutions could be found, which would mean operational theatre venues could stay open. However, this year we are now starting to see the full impact of these challenges and sadly have taken the decision to add 5 theatres to the register. All are local authority owned buildings of small to mid scale, added to the register due to the squeeze to local authority budgets or issues with RAC. We realise it's a difficult time for the theatre sector and will continue to be so for a while yet. But beyond the Theatres at Risk register, we continue to work and support many other theatres throughout the country which are facing similar challenges to try and ensure that they do not become at risk in the future. So now to move on to the theatre being removed from our 2025 register, and this is the Theatre Royal in Hyde. It's a Grade 2 listed Edwardian theatre that had been on the register since it first began in 2006. The theatre closed as a cinema in 1992 and was then threatened with demolition for a housing development, but was saved by spot listing in 2000. It remained disused and then was purchased by the Hyde Islamic Resource Centre in November 2016. And the photos you see on your screen are a mix of those from 2016 and slightly earlier years. The Islamic Resource Centre has now been granted listed building consent to carry out various works, including roof repairs and alterations to facilitate its use as a community centre, as a cultural centre. The nature of these works will not prevent the building from being returned to performance use if the demand for this arose. And with the building being in regular use as a cultural centre, it means that the threat of harm to the building has reduced to the extent where we can remove it from the theatre's at-risk register. And now turning to the additions to this year's register, and firstly, Oswald Twizzell Civic Arts Centre and Theatre. And that's the image to the left of your screens. This building has been at the heart of its community for more than 150 years and is the only public theatre in the area. The building's had so many uses over that time, including as a mixed ballroom, hall and theatre space, a town fire station, a recruiting station for the First World War, and the headquarters of the town council. So you can see just how integral this building has been to its local community. In 2010, it was refurbished and reopened as an arts centre and studio space with a 450-seat auditorium at the upper level, which you can see in the images on the screen there. Sadly, the theatre closed in July 2023 when the operator went into liquidation. The building operation reverted to Hyde and Burn Council, which commissioned extensive survey work to understand the condition of the building and what was needed to repair and bring the building up to modern day standards. The reports show that the building requires significant investment, and this comes at a particularly difficult time for the council when it's facing other financial priorities. Hyde and Burn is the 16th most deprived local authority in the country and in the lowest 20% for arts engagement. The loss of this significant cultural facility poses a risk of having further negative impact on the area. However, there is some good news, and that is that the council is keen to see the building reopened, and Theatres Trust has extended support and hopes to work with them to help find a viable solution to see a key cultural and community facility saved. The image on the right of your screens is the Prince of Wales Theatre in Cannock, another venue that is an important local facility for its community and the only theatre provision in the immediate area. The theatre itself was built in 1984 and is a replacement for the town's previous Victorian theatre. Cannock Chase Council has proposed permanently closing the theatre and also its museum from April of this year to make budgetary savings. It's worth noting that this is a huge change in circumstances for the theatre, which was going to be refurbished and extended as part of a levelling up project for the town. Cannock has no other local cultural provision, and the proposed closure will leave many community groups, from amateur dramatics groups through to local performing arts schools and children's dance groups, without a space to perform, and audiences without access to live performance. Newly established local group Cannock Heritage and Arts is campaigning to save both the theatre and the local museum. It's considering options to keep the buildings open and has begun dialogue with the council. We're also in discussion with the group and have extended support to the council. And it's really hoped that through further engagement and collaborative working, a sustainable solution can be found that will keep the theatre open for the benefit of all in Cannock. And now on to the 3 theatres added to the register due to RAC, or crumbling concrete. To the left of the screen is the Harlequin Theatre and Cinema in Redhill in Surrey. It's a popular multi-purpose theatre and arts venue located right at the heart of Redhill, which closed in September 2023 as a precaution following the discovery of RAC. A detailed inspection has now indicated that the Harlequin contains significant amounts of RAC within both flat and pitched roofs and within the floor. All are considered high risk and the panels will require replacement. The work required is complicated by the theatre's location within a shopping centre, and initial estimates have put the cost of the works at £10 million. The council says it recognises the value of arts and the role that the Harlequin plays in the community, and that it will continue to explore options for alternative cultural provision while the Harlequin remains closed. The council executive is meeting on the 30th of January, so 2 days from now, to consider options both for the Harlequin and for interim cultural provision. However, all options are likely to bear significant cost and have extensive timescales, and it's therefore likely that the theatre will remain closed for many years yet. Moving on to the image in the middle of your screens, and this is of the Brunton Theatre in Musselburgh. It's yet another popular local venue, which unfortunately finds itself in that sad situation of being included on our Theatres at Risk register. It's a fine, modernist, textured concrete and glass building that was built in 1971 following a bequest from local businessman John Brunton, who was founder of the local Brunton Wireworks. It was actually the first theatre to close due to the presence of RAAC, and that was way back in March 2023. A detailed conditions report has since indicated significant water ingress, resulting in deterioration of some of the roof panels, posing an ongoing risk of failure. The council has undertaken extensive survey work and considered a range of costed options for the building, and sadly concluded that the building needs to be mothballed and, subject to community consultation, demolished. There is strong local support to retain a theatre in Musselburgh, with the local community and councillors all calling for a replacement venue should this theatre indeed be demolished. So the future of the venue currently hangs in the balance, but whatever option is decided, whether that's refurbishment or reprovision, it will be at significant cost and it will take many years to come to fruition. And finally, moving on to Motherwell Motherwell Concert Hall and Theatre. And this is a Category B listed building, which forms part of Motherwell Civic Centre Complex, a landmark grouping of modernist public buildings within Motherwell. The venue closed in September 2023, yet again due to RAAC, and this is in the roof. A detailed survey has found that a significant proportion of that roof has been affected. As meeting of the Council Cabinet in December 2024, it was concluded that the £11 million cost to replace the RAAC and the associated services and fixtures was economically unviable, and a recommendation to demolish the buildings was approved. The site will be left for car parking or open public space. The concert hall and theatre are not considered to impact the remainder of the Civic Centre structurally. However, the architectural heritage and social loss to both the people of Motherwell and to a Category B listed complex is great. The council has suggested that the potential new live performance space could be provided within the Ravenscrag complex outside the town centre, but the scale and type of reprovision and the impact of relocation to audiences and to town centre businesses all has yet to be determined. As with all the venues added to this year's register, there is community support for the theatre and concert hall and for a much loved part of the town and an important cultural provision to be saved. So some really difficult news from this year's register, with theatres in incredibly perilous situations. However, I never like to finish on a low note, so I now like to share with you some pivotal moments from our work with theatres on the register from this last year. So we always say that the work to revive a theatre on our Theatres at Risk register takes energy, enthusiasm and time. These are all long-term projects and progress is often in small incremental steps. The timescales involved, and these could be 10-year plus projects, require groups to be able to swiftly adapt to ever-changing situations. So this could be shifting landscapes of funding, changes in ownership or differing stakeholder partnerships, or even changes to local political situations. And we see this need for a flexible approach firsthand through our work with these groups, supporting the theatres on the Theatres at Risk register. So I'd just like to share a few of those stories with you. Ownership. Now, ownership of a building is often one of the greatest challenges for the groups that we work with. I'm sure many of you in the audience will appreciate that. And a change in ownership can bring an unexpected change in direction for a campaign group or a theatre operator. And Groundlings Theatre, the building on the screen, is no exception. The theatre is operated by the Groundlings Theatre Trust, a passionate team that's operated the Groundlings Theatre since 2020 and who are determined to keep this important local building and valuable resource open for its local community. However, there are challenges with the condition of the building, which is under separate ownership, and the group's initial 10-year lease had proved a barrier to obtaining grants to fund essential repair works. Those who attended last year's Theatres at Risk launch event may recall that the group had been hoping to unlock this situation by purchasing the Groundlings Theatre, thereby allowing access to public funding and through this helping secure the building's future. The group's energy and focus have been channeled towards this goal and have resulted in a successful bid to the Community Ownership Fund to help them buy the building. However, the building was sold at an online auction to a real estate developer. And this has required the group to really rethink and pivot their focus. So they're now starting to build a relationship with that new owner, and discussions have shifted towards looking at a long-term lease. Discussions have also started over essential repairs to the building, and the new owner has now undertaken vital repairs of a previously closed front of house area, which has enabled the Groundlings Theatre Trust to reopen and use the space for public hires, a really important income stream for them. And looking at the screen, it's a small image to the at the bottom left, which is of the Venetian room at the Groundlings Theatre that's just reopened. So the focus for Groundlings Theatre Trust is now how to sustain theatre operation into the future. We're supporting them in this work through our Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities programme with a grant to help them reach new audiences and demonstrate the impact of their work. It's work that will support them as a group as they seek to grow and strengthen their organisation, and in turn will help ensure a successful future for the building. And on the screen now, you can see images of the theatre wall in Margate. It really is a spectacular Grade 2 star listed theatre, which really sadly closed its doors to the public in 2022. The building's owned by Thanet District Council, who have been actively seeking ways to make the theatre operation self-sustaining and in finding solutions to the challenges faced in restoring the building. It's looked at various different solutions to resolve these problems over the years, but finding funding for the work has always been a challenge. Some in the audience may recall when the theatre was first added to our Theatres at Risk register in 2018, and that was when the council and their preferred operator were unable to secure funding for a scheme that would have seen updates and improvements to the theatre and utilising new activity within the adjacent 19 Hawley Square to help cross-subsidise the theatre operation. The preferred operator has since moved on and the council has needed to reassess the situation. Fast forward to 2022, and Thanet Council announced that it had been successful in securing some funding for the theatre through its wider bid to the government's Town Fund initiative. The funding has been focused on urgent works to the building and enabled the council to recruit a project manager to drive forward works to determine a new and sustainable vision for the theatre. And some in the audience may recall Hayley White, the project manager at the council, presenting at last year's Theatres at Risk register event. Theatres Trust has also provided support to the council with a grant through our Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities programme, allowing them to undertake a statement of heritage significance for the building and to carry out further community consultation and market testing to support future funding bids. All of these works combined have resulted in a really new and exciting vision for the theatre as a vibrant performing arts hub for Margate. However, securing the necessary funding to achieve the vision is proving more tricky. An application to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which is a highly competitive fund, was unfortunately unsuccessful. However, there has been some good news, and Thanet District Council has recently been able to reallocate an additional £2.8 million of its Towns Fund money towards the Theatre Royal. This funding will allow significant progress on the project to restore the theatre building. but it won't be enough to fully fund the creative hub that had been envisaged. So the council once again needs to reassess the project, looking at creating a master plan that can enable the vision to be achieved in different stages. So a phased approach rather than carrying out the project all in one go. And all of this will need to reflect the current financial constraints and also an awareness of ensuring historic sensitivity and operational viability. The design team for the project are due to be appointed in the near future, and we look forward to seeing further developments as the council takes these next steps in delivering the project. The theatre on your screens now is the Amulet Theatre in Shepton Mallet. It was built in 1975. The building itself was a gift to the town from the Showering family, who are famed for brewing that popular drink, Babycham. The theatre has most recently been in use as a gym, and there has been a planning application for conversion to apartments. Local campaign group, Let's Buy the Amulet, formed after the building was added to our Theatres at Risk register in 2022 and wants to see the building reopened as an arts and cultural hub. In the short time that the group has been formed, it's undertaken valuable early-stage evidencing work, developing a viability study with grant funding through the Architectural Heritage Fund and securing funding from the Community Shares Booster Fund for support in setting up a community business model. We have also awarded them funding through our Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities Grants programme to increase the scope of the viability works and to enable the group to have a more comprehensive plan that would appeal to funders. So initially the end goal was for all of these works to support an application to the Community Ownership Fund to allow the group to buy the building. However, in 2024, the group was presented an opportunity by Somerset County Council, who put the theatre forward, or the theatre proposal forward, as part of a wider bid for the Levelling Up funding. Grant-funded works was therefore refocused to ensure that it supplied the exacting requirements for this particular bid. Now, due to some challenges with Levelling Up funding, this funding option hasn't moved forward, but the preparatory work done by the group for this bid is still incredibly valuable. It's created a solid foundation for them to pursue other sources of funding, including preparing the ground for any new community ownership fund that may come forward in the future. And while raising funds to purchase the building is currently on temporary hold, Let's Buy the Amulet are looking at other options. They've recognised that a different approach is now necessary, so their focus has started to shift towards the possibility of meanwhile use of the building. The group are building positive relationships with the building's owners and key stakeholders and continue to foster community support for restoring the building. They've also been keeping an eye out for any other opportunities that may arise and have recently been gifted 400 theatre seats from Cambridge Arts Theatre, a really massive boost to the plans for eventual restoration of the theatre. And the image to the right of the screens there is taken from the group's press release about that particular donation. Theatres Trust is going to continue to support the group as they pursue this new goal of enabling live performance and community events and reactivating the building for the benefit of the town. So even when things may appear on hold with the project, it's important to keep telling the story about these wonderful theatre buildings and to continue to engage current audiences and people and to attract new ones. The buildings on the Theatres at Risk register have all been at the very heart of their local community and all have rich histories. So it's not always about the major announcements, such as those major capital works funding successes, but it's about the local and that unique connection that the buildings have with their communities. I want to share just a few examples of how groups working with Theatres at Risk are keeping the storytelling going and continuing to build their audiences. So the image on your screens is from Burnley Empire Trust's recent project, Connecting People with Hidden Heritage. The work is funded through a small grant from National Lottery Heritage Fund, so this is one of the under £10,000 grants, and it's allowed the group to train volunteers to host Heritage Open Days. This has given people an opportunity to see inside the historic venue, which has been closed since 1995, so 30 years since its last active use. It's allowed audiences to look beyond the photographs and behind the decaying facade and to really learn about the building. The work is also included in an exhibition at Creative Spaces Burnley on neighbouring St James's Street, featuring photographs about the restoration of the Empire, and all the images on your screen there are all from the Connecting People with Heritage project. And the result of this project, the group has more community interest than ever in their work and in the Empire. Moving now on to Leith Theatre, and while there is major work continuing in the background, finalising the lease agreement for the building, pursuing capital funding opportunities, and there was a recent announcement that the theatre will be presenting a stage production for the first time in 7 years as part of a pop-up summer season. But beyond all of this, the team at Leith Theatre Trust is continuing to build links with its community and celebrate the rich heritage of the building. In April 2024, it was awarded a grant through our Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities programme to undertake a pilot oral history project, transforming the old ticket booths into spaces for people to record their stories about the building. And those are the images that you can see in the centre of the screen there. This work, which will be ongoing, is allowing the Trust to build a memory bank to preserve not only the building's history, but also the experiences and stories of the people who've been part of the journey. On your screens now is Ramsbottom Co-op Hall, a really remarkable building which was constructed as part of the cooperative movement pledge to make provision for education, culture and the arts. And this building was constructed in the 1870s. The theatre is on the upper levels of the building, and while the ground floor retail unit has remained occupied, the theatre space has been disused since the 1940s, so an enormously long time. However, as hopefully you can make out in the small images over towards the left of the screen, you can see it actually remains in remarkably good condition. Campaign group Ramsbottom Co-op Hall Heritage Trust Limited has recently organised a community event, Ramsbottom Come Together Festival. The festival was held in a number of venues across Ramsbottom and was a celebration of culture, featuring an array of music, art, dance, theatre and spoken word. It provided an opportunity for the group to raise its profile and show how Co-op Hall could support the town's cultural and community activity. And the images to the right of your screen really show the vibrancy of that event and how all of the community got involved. So telling the story and increasing awareness of this hidden and once forgotten part of Ramsbottom's past is an important step towards the group's goal of purchasing and restoring the building. The group has been successful in its bid to Community Ownership Fund to help fund the purchase of the building and is currently in negotiations with the owner. The next step is for the group to launch a community share offer to help match fund for the purchase and restore the Co-op Hall. We've also provided support for this work, awarding the group a grant from our Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities programme to fund business planning and fundraising development work. And we wish the group all the very best in their negotiation of the purchase and for the launch of the community share offer. And then to end, I wanted to share with you some outcomes from the work being undertaken by Save Hume Hippodrome. This is work that's awarded funding again through our Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities programme, and it's for a community engagement project aimed at promoting two-way communication, reaching new audiences, and elevating the profile and opportunity of the building in the local area. And for Save Hume Hippodrome, it's a different slant to their campaigning, which has previously been more about the worsening condition of the building and challenging ownership. But it's proving to be really valuable and important work, providing evidence of the local community's love for the building and support for its restoration. So I just wanted to end with a poem that's come through this work, undertaken by community engagement consultant Deb Walker and artist and poet Grio Gabriel through their work with pupils at Rolls Crescent Primary School. And the following is a poem by a Year 6 student at the school.
If I could design the Hippodrome, I'd make sure it's not alone. It's not going to be rotten. It makes it feel forgotten. I'd place an art room, making it large. But don't worry, it's free of charge. The abandoned will be known. It makes it feel like home. Hippo's history is no longer a mystery. I hope my oration will unite our nation.
Wow, and what a wonderful and heartwarming poem, and a fantastic way to end this section of the event. So, with very many thanks to a very talented Year 6 student, Deb Walker, Community Engagement Consultant, Artist Poet Greer Gabriel, and all at Rolls Crescent Primary School, and also to Save Hume Hippodrome for sharing this with us. I would now like to hand over to my colleague Sian Eager, our Theatres at Risk advisor, and Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities Programme Manager, to introduce our next session, Reviving Theatres at Risk.
Thank you very much, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Sian, and as Claire's mentioned, I am the Theatres at Risk advisor for Theatres Trust. So in my role, I get to work with a range of people across the UK who are all striving to revive the buildings that we've been hearing about that are on our Theatres at Risk register. And I'm delighted that I'm chairing this little segment of our event today when we get to hear from some of those people directly. So I'd like to introduce our speakers who hopefully will appear on the screen alongside me. We have Dr. Joanne O'Hara, who is the Heritage Commission Coordinator at Salford City Council and has been working in support of Victoria Theatre in Salford. Also welcome Samantha Lahai Taylor, who is the Principal Project Officer, Placemaking and Wellbeing at Kent County Council and has been working on proposals for the Roundhouse in Dover. And Lucy Godfrey, who is Executive Officer at Derbyshire Historic Buildings Trust, who's working in support of Derby Hippodrome. That's great. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate you giving up your time and coming to talk to us about your experiences in working with these buildings. I wondered if we could start by asking each of you to give a little bit of an introduction, a little bit more of an introduction into your role and what you do and how it is that you are involved with a theatre at risk. So I would like to start, Jo, if I could ask you to kick off and explain your role.
Yes, of course. And firstly, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Joanne O'Hara, and I have been at Salford City Council only since spring last year, and so I am relatively new in post. And I have been working and focusing on predominantly the heritage at risk assets within the Salford City Council district. And one of those assets, as you mentioned, is the Salford Victoria Theatre, which is Grade 2 and has been on the risk register for a really quite a long time. So it's one of those that very much sits in that empty and derelict state. And so that's the theatre in particular that I'm interested in for my wider work in the historic environment.
That's great, Joanne, thank you. And then Samantha, could I ask you to explain your role? Obviously local authority as well, but slightly different from Joanne. So
yeah, so my remit is around placemaking and well-being, and essentially I look at cultural infrastructure in places across Kent County Council, and how we can support the retention and development of places. Primarily, that's done through our cultural planning toolkit, which works at a local plan level on model policies around cultural infrastructure and engagement. Also around kind of placemaking, responsible for the priority places in Kent, which is Dover, where the Roundhouse is based, and Swale Borough Council, Swale Borough, and Gravesham as well. So they're one of 54 places highlighted by Arts Council England, where there's not as much investment going into those places for kind of cultural projects and engagement. So that's the kind of placemaking side of things. Also work with external partners such as the Coastal Cultural Network around our coastlines. We've got 350 miles of coastline in Kent, so a lot of coastal communities to take care of, and also well-being, and that's looking at creative health and how creativity, whether it's directly kind of developed to support people through specific health concerns, and also culture as a byproduct in a place. So having culture and how that affects the well-being of our communities, of everyone as a whole. And part of that work, I'm involved with the National Centre for Creative Health, and I'm a champion with them. And the Roundhouse is part of our kind of placemaking initiative and also supports some of the kind of health outcomes for Dover's communities as well, because there's some issues around there. So and that's where I kind of come into play around getting the Roundhouse up and in use for uh, community access, and also to kind of increase engagement and investment into Dover.
That's great, Samantha. So very much quite a wide brief, if you don't mind me saying, but very much linked to what Josh mentioned at the very start of the meeting in terms of the role that culture plays in well-being. So that's great. I look forward to hearing a little bit more about that as we move on. And then Lucy, you are coming from a different perspective again. Perhaps you'd like to explain your role and the nature of your organisation and your interest in Derby Hippodrome.
Thanks, Sian. So I'm Lucy Godfrey and I'm the Executive Officer at Derbyshire Historic Buildings Trust, or DHBT. DHBT are a building preservation trust, and as a charity, we've been responsible for the rescue of over 100 historic buildings in the county over the past 50 years. So as Sian says, I'm coming from a slightly different angle, more of the sort of community group view. During the last 5 years or so, DHBT have been working as a partner and as a facilitator to find an achievable route to bring Derby Hippodrome into use. This has involved liaising with Derby Hippodrome Restoration Trust, who are a focused community campaign group who have advocated for the Hippodrome over many years, Derby City Council, Historic England and the University of Derby. So the title deeds of the Hippodrome are held by a private developer who is looking to create commercial development on the site. But DHBT has recent relevant experience of securing a partnership with local authority and being a back-to-back purchaser as part of a compulsory purchase order. So on a grade 2 star listed building in Amber Valley Borough Council. So really DHBT are very keen to share our experience and knowledge from this to now support the City Council and others to progress the Derby Hippodrome project.
That's great, Lucy. Yes. So you're coming at this from a different angle, but obviously the council do hopefully still have a role to play in securing that building. And as a voluntary group, you're perhaps facing different challenges than our colleagues in local authorities. So we'll try and explore those issues as our conversation unfolds. So as well as having different perspectives, I know that you're also dealing with different buildings, and you've started to touch on this, but it would be great if you could just tell us a little bit more about the specific theatres at risk that you're working on in terms of what the building's like now, what's the state in condition, and what the potential might be, and any ideas or visions that you're trying to build up on at the moment. Now, if we go in the same order, if that's okay, if I start with you, Joanne, I appreciate that. For you, it's slightly different. You do have that wider strategic role, but you all are also interested in trying to find solutions for individual buildings. So tell us what you can about Salford Victoria at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. So the theatre is grade 2 listed. It is quite an enormous building, and it has been empty since 2007. And so it has been a really very long time since it has been in operational use. And its last use was as a bingo hall. So in terms of the theatre itself, a lot of the internal fabric remains as it was. And so we have a really, really rich interior full of decoration. The seats have been removed, but there are lots of original details that are still there, which provide an absolutely fantastic opportunity for saving and enhancing into the future. It is in a very vulnerable condition, and it is in a location that needs investment and it needs attention in terms of the cityscape more widely. But as I say, there is an enormous opportunity in terms of the community and for the reuse of that building to bring some real vibrancy to that area and to actually deliver a use that the community really want and need there, and is, desperately lacking at the present time. And whilst I'm here in the capacity as local authority, the building remains in private ownership. And so there is that issue around the control and actually what can be done at this point in time whilst it remains in that ownership to actually instigate change and work with the owners that we currently have to try and secure the condition of that building to make sure that it doesn't get any worse. What we also have is a very enthusiastic and excellent local community group who are very passionate, not only about the building itself, but also about the links into the community and how that relates to the people of Salford, who themselves are very, very proud of their heritage. And so we've got an absolutely wonderful opportunity in terms of that community to be able to really help their provision in the community. And I think just sort of mentioned that's one of the areas that the Theatres Trust has been really good, because the Theatres Trust have been supporting the SVTT for a really long time in terms of their governance and their models, in order to make sure that they are as robust an organisation as possible, which, you know, from my perspective is a really positive thing to start conversations with a group who are, you know, hitting the ground running already. So it's really good. So lots of opportunity. Absolutely enormous undertaking, but I think full of optimism of what could be done next.
Yeah, that's great to hear, Jo, and your enthusiasm for the building is coming through. So that's great to hear that there are options, and always, as you say, striving to find a useful community use. And Theatres Trust are happy to work with you and the community group to try and navigate that. Samantha, you're in a slightly different position because your building is not quite in the same category, but still the community value is obviously there. Tell us a little bit more about the Roundhouse.
Yeah, it's got very strong community value, but it's not it's not theatre. That's the main thing. It's the history of the Roundhouse. It's part of a wider building, so it's not a separate building. So it forms part of the Dover Discovery Centre, which was erected as part of the development of the Channel Tunnel. So currently it has co-located services from KCC, so that involves a library service, children's services, adult education existing the main part of the building. And towards the end, to make it a bit more complex, we have Dover District Council's museum that's attached to the end of the building. So the Roundhouse, the best way to describe it is a drum. If you can imagine a really large chimney, that's what it looks like with an entrance. And it's got racked seating for about 150 people. And it was an exhibition space for the Channel Tunnel. So, you know, you would walk straight into the space, sit down, and a big screen would project the kind of the development of the tunnel and kind of history and the whole kind of experience that was kind of taking place at the time. So it's a very new building, but it didn't quite hold up to the test of time, and it's recently gone under some development in the other co-located spaces. The challenge was around the Roundhouse, because there was a theatre company situated in the space for a number of years, and once they left, that space was essentially mothballed as well. So we've got development happening in the wider building, but not so much on the Roundhouse. So the situation has improved because it's allowed us to have improvement works to the roof, because there was a huge amount of kind of water ingress in the space, and also in terms of the electrical equipment. Also to add kind of complexity to the building, it sits upon Roman ruins, and it's surrounded by Roman ruins as well. So you can actually access the crawl space underneath the theatre and see the ruins there as well. The Resilient Theatres programme is a really great opportunity to kind of hash out a feasibility study on the space and start to think about how we could kind of bring it back into community use, because there aren't a lot of cultural venues or infrastructure in the space that's open for a multitude of creative use. And what we want the space for is essentially for the community to use it for a number of things. The height of the space kind of supports the kind of parades and puppetry work that kind of happens in Dover, as well as being located on an A road. It's perfect for music because it doesn't back onto any residential areas. So it's a real kind of multi-use cultural space that we'd really kind of like to kind of realise and bring back into kind of community use. And we're slowly and steadily getting to that place. But I think that also the challenge is that being within the Culture and Creative Economy Service, we don't actually own any buildings. So it sits within our infrastructure and our properties team. And, you know, challenging times for councils financially. The first thing is the disposal of venues, but luckily because it's a co-located building and it has other services in it, we are able to kind of retain it. But it is a kind of a long journey. But the Resilient Theatres programme is really supportive in starting to kind of make some traction and bringing it back into community use.
That's great, Samantha. You're really painting a picture there of the building and the complexity and that multi-use hub type scenario, which is a common feature in some more modern buildings. So that complexity also may well be helping it to then revert to the community use that we're keen for you to pursue. So that's great. Thank you. And then Lucy, tell us about Derby Hippodrome. Yeah.
So Derby Hippodrome is Grade 2 listed. The original design drawings were produced by Marshall and Tweedy of Newcastle upon Tyne. It was actually built as a variety theatre in 1914 and used as a cinema and bingo hall until falling into disuse in 2006. I believe the Hippodrome has been on the Theatres at Risk register since its inception, so that gives you an idea of its current condition. And as long as the building stands vacant and unused, obviously it's at serious risk of further loss and remains unsafe. In 2021, the Theatres Trust funded a market appraisal and feasibility study that looked at local and regional competition and supply and demand in the area. And this work actually identified that the need in Derby was for a music venue with a particular focus on alternative and independent music, a niche that isn't going to be filled by current developments in the city. Rather than returning it to being a theatre. Consultation also identified demand for an inclusive and accessible venue where artists and creatives can make work, experiment and engage with communities not currently involved. Therefore, our present focus is to secure funding that will allow us to explore the architectural solutions based on a minimal intervention approach, so basically using the shell of the building to still achieve good impact and outcomes. And we want to demonstrate how, with minimum cost, the Hippodrome can also drive growth, improve experiences for local people, and ensure future sustainability. So obviously, with the regeneration of Derby City Council well underway, the City Council and all partners actually are keen to secure the repair and reuse of this listed building.
That's great, Lucy. And it's fair to say anyone that's seen the outside, it does need love and attention. But it's great that you, as a group, and all the work you've been building up to do, you're creating a real vision for how that space and making use of the building as it is now, not just looking to preserve or reconstruct what was there in the past, but make it come alive in a modern use. I think it's clear from the conversation we're having that even though your buildings are quite different, there is a unifying factor that you've all got an ambition to return these buildings to community use that has value at the current time and that is sustainable. So as much as it's preserving what we've got, it's looking to the future as well, which is great to hear. It's all great work. So one of the questions that perhaps Josh has been getting in his multiple PR interviews earlier today and surrounding this launch of the list is about the value of preserving these buildings and why investing in these buildings is important. And there's some big themes around this about audience need and placemaking, which unfortunately it would be really interesting to hear your views, but we don't quite have the time for that. But in terms of the context that you're working in, is there anything you would like to share about what you feel passionate about in terms of this building and the value that it brings? Perhaps could I start with you, Lucy, on that question? Yeah.
Well, certainly the sort of the cultural significance of the Hippodrome, relates to this uniqueness of its design and the history of the building. It's a rare survival from an early stage in that crossover period when buildings were being constructed for both live theatre and cinema. So it's obviously got that cultural significance, which is important. But like you just said, Sian, the public support for the building is also considerable. This was well demonstrated by the public outcry following partial demolition a few years ago, and also by its registration as a community asset in 2013. I think that gives a good demonstration of that. DHBT as a group, we're very much advocating the role of the Hippodrome within the regeneration of the city centre. And our intention is that any future capital works will also be undertaken in a way that provides training for those seeking careers in the construction industry. That's a particular aim of DHBT at the moment. So that would be part of our future aspiration. We obviously want to take advantage of the momentum we've had recently. Recent Theatres Trust funding again has allowed for the formation of a Derby Music Group, who are becoming the advisory group for how the building will best function as a music venue. None of us at DHBT are music experts, so we really need that expert input to make sure whatever plans we do develop are the right ones. And really those design solutions will confirm to the City Council how we can use the repaired shell of a building at relatively low cost and give them confidence for proceeding with an urgent works notice, hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. So it's step by step, building a case to persuade those that have that influence to bring that building back to use. That's great, Lucy. Thank you. And Samantha, in terms of you've mentioned placemaking and well-being, obviously central to your role. How does the Roundhouse sit with that and the value it could potentially bring to the community?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of a really kind of strong thread with everything. Like I mentioned before, just having culture is a byproduct is better health, and kind of having that baseline is really important in that place. And where it's really important for Dover is that community access space that depending on what kind of creative art form you're interested in, having the space to develop, to rehearse, and present is not readily available within the town centre. So that's going to be kind of instrumental in terms of their kind of priority place status and getting more people engaged with cultural activity, because where we're at the moment is that there's funding available for the area, but there's not, kind of pathways and routes in to kind of harness that kind of those resources. So we see that the Roundhouse is really important in terms of grassroots development, individual artists. It's going to be an open all kind of access space for people to kind of develop work in Dover and also kind of receive work. We kind of see the space as almost like a kind of training facility. It does have the legacy of the exhibition, which is kind of like racked lighting. So we looked at through the feasibility study how we could kind of use that in terms of kind of theatre lighting and teaching and kind of reinforcing that. It still has a technical box, so there's a technical aspects of theatre that we could kind of still use. But again, as I mentioned, it's perfect for music, creation, presentation, and a host of other things. So it's really important that it might seem like it doesn't have a huge footprint, but the potential in terms of how it can kind of nurture kind of cultural and creative careers in Dover is really important, and how that also affects the economy. And when we think about kind of creative health, we're kind of working on those wider determinants. So we know that a lot of people that are sick and accessing kind of healthcare, it's not due to ill health, it's kind of those social environments. So education, employment, and where we can kind of start to plug in those gaps through creativity. It's really important to us.
That's great. That's great. And then, Joe, could I ask you to sort of answer a similar question, but you're looking at a more perhaps strategic level in terms of why the council has made this commitment to heritage?
Yes, that is a big question though, and I think it does come within that context. As we've mentioned already, the pressures of local authority funding. I think there's a wider point about heritage at risk more generally across the board, which is there's a lot of I suppose the investment in the historic environment, in particular in in listed buildings is often seen as quite a drain in terms of that investment that is needed to be made. But actually, what I've been trying to think about is actually all of those unseen costs that are often, having to be absorbed by a local authority that are actually not being used proactively. So things around environmental health and antisocial behaviour and all of the problems that are associated with buildings in a derelict state, that actually if you can start using some of that investment positively and actually bring benefits to the community, it really sort of enhances the area and actually puts a really much more positive spin on that investment, and make sure that it then ties into what Lucy was saying in terms of the skills training, the investment, the high quality jobs, what that does for regeneration and the economy more widely. So I think it's really just sort of trying to tackle some of these problems head on, not being afraid of them when they are really big and really scary, and actually just trying to join the dots between quite a lot of organisations that are already out there looking at that same agenda and really working proactively to try and fix these things.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Now, sadly, we are getting quite near to the end of our time, so I'm just going to ask one final question for each of you to give a snapshot, really, of what approach you've taken so far and what your next step might be, things for us to look out for, so that potentially in 12 months' time we've got an update on this Theatres at Risk going in a positive way. So could I start with you, Lucy, in terms of I appreciate we could have spent a little bit more time discussing this, but I'm keen to understand how you as a community group have kept this alive and on track, and what you hope to take as your next step.
Yeah, it's certainly not been easy. I think, as you've already indicated, you have to take quite a flexible approach to achieving the vision, and perseverance is definitely rewarded. I think there's no quick fix. So we, along with all the partners involved, have had to progress sort of on that step-by-step basis and adapting to developments and findings as they arise. The support through the Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities programme has been invaluable. It's helped us to define our vision and to work through the governance and operational questions. So getting those basics in place is really important to be able to build your case for further support. As I say, perseverance is needed in situations where you're definitely not the owner of a building. For us, we definitely feel that this next step of exploring the viability of a minimal intervention approach and understanding the costs of that will help stakeholders to make informed decisions regarding what is now required to prevent the further deterioration of the significant building. So that's it in a nutshell, I think, Sian.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Lucy. And Samantha, would you like to go next? Some closing words from you.
I would just kind of like to echo the really importance of the Resilience Theatres programme. That has been a huge milestone in where we've kind of come. I didn't mention at the beginning, I'm like almost 2 years in at KCC. So once I kind of inherited this project, a lot of water had kind of run under the bridge. It was a nice way to kind of say it, but it's allowed us to kind of come with a solution. And I think, especially when it comes to community assets such as theatres, there's a lot of kind of passion behind them, and people want to kind of seem to be doing the right thing, and the community wants you to do the right thing. So I think it kind of paints a really kind of positive picture of the direction that we want to travel in, and that it really kind of speaks to the kind of community need as well. We've already started kind of discussions with arts organisations, artists, the town council around how we can kind of harness this document as well, this feasibility study, to maybe kind of in support of other applications. We do look at kind of CPP, Creative People and Places, but we might look at some other kind of project funding to kind of realise this, and maybe look at where we can kind of tap into asset development type funding to kind of start to look at how we realise this space. There's not a huge amount of investment needed into the space. It's kind of a bit of kind of creative thinking. There was some really kind of phased solutions, but quite minimal kind of interventions to the space to make it usable. But yeah, I think we're at a really good point now where we can kind of start conversation with the community and say this is kind of the space for you and this is how you can use it. And there's still kind of room to kind of breathe and kind of maneuver and kind of be quite flexible. But I think at our stage we really needed to kind of have an idea or some sort of framework in place to kind of present to other people in terms of like our infrastructure teams and other kind of relevant kind of stakeholders to the building of our intentions as well. And it's been really kind of valuable in kind of aiding those conversations.
That's great to hear that you think you're in that positive place, and hopefully the work you've done recently will be the catalyst to take it to that work to completion. That's great. Thank you, Samantha. And then finally, Joe, over to you. Tell us a little, in essence, about your ways of working and what you hope will be coming next for the.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I think firstly, just to sort of mirror a little bit of what my colleagues on screen have been saying as well, I think it's quite difficult when you're embarking on these really big projects that you really need to trench in for, potentially decades on, that it's quite a difficult ask. So I think what I'd probably say is we kind of need to think about how we reframe the question about what actually is success in these situations, and actually breaking those things down to actually celebrate much smaller milestones. Because actually, in the case of the Salford Victoria, the full refurbishment of the entire building is very, very distant prospect. But actually, there's loads of other things that we can be celebrating along the way that will be really massive achievements. So I think it's actually trying to break that down and I think about the project in a sort of incremental way, and then be able to sort of build upon those successes and actually work over that much longer time frame, so that it is, it's not such a scary prospect for people to come along board with us.
That's great, Joe. And I'm sure that people on the call who are in similar situations looking to save other buildings across the UK appreciate those positive words, because we all know that it is a journey to get these buildings off our register and revived for community use. So I'd like to offer my thanks to the three of you for giving your time and energy and expertise and sharing your experiences. I appreciate you being here and look forward to working with you as things move forward. So this brings our little session to a close, and I'd like to invite our CEO, Joshua Matagat, back to the screen for our next phase.
And also our panel speakers, please stay on, because we've got about 5-6 minutes for some questions. So I'd like to introduce some of the Theatre Trust colleagues. So welcome back, Claire Appleby, our architecture advisor, and also welcome to the event, Michelle Caroline Palmer, who is our theatres advisor, and also Tom Clark, who is our planning advisor. And by the magic of Zoom, they should be spotlit. And Michelle, I know you've been looking at questions, and maybe people have been holding off some questions. So we've got probably time for 1 or 2 questions. So if anyone has an urgent question, please ping it directly, chat to Michelle. But Michelle, I'll hand over to you if there's anything that stood out from what you've been sent.
So quite quiet on the chat room at the moment, but as Joshua has said, there's still time. I'm 2 weeks into this new job, so I'm going to ask a very cheeky question from myself, actually, and it's to everybody in the room and perhaps anyone on the meeting chat as well. I'm just curious around whether there are any Theatres at Risk register success stories that have been saved that have inspired current projects. I don't know, and leading on from what Joanna was saying, is success is they can be seen to be really small but really important successes, and sort of pivotal moments. So it's just out of curiosity whether anyone wanted to come in on that question.
Is there anyone from the truck, Claire? Do you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I was going to say, shall I come in on that? I mean, we've had some fantastic successes from the past years. Just thinking, Josh has already mentioned Walthamstow Granada, that's going to be reopening as Soho Theatre Walthamstow. And part of the success of that project was our involvement at an early stage with the council, where we introduced them to the team at the Stockton Globe, which was a previous theatre at risk. And there the council had stepped in and done some brilliant work in kind of taking that building on and restoring it and really understanding the value of it to
We'll
I
never
think
know.
we've just hit a technical glitch in Claire's answer, so I'm going to wait for a moment to see if she returns. But if not, we can maybe return to the answer in a moment. We've gone so smoothly for an hour and 45. Oh, Claire, you're back. Do you want to finish that last bit
Oh,
of your?
sorry. So I was just going to say we do a lot of work with kind of connecting theatres with similar stories. So whether that's local authorities or whether that's theatre groups as well. And I know the theatre groups of all of those supporting the theatres or the theatres at risk.
And we have another technical issue. We'll just put, but thanks, Claire, for attempting through two technical errors there. I have a question. There was a really interesting thought about the intersection with construction training. So not just theatres at risk, but what that means for the construction sector. I know from our organisation, we're really interested in the future of the architecture and built environment sector, especially in terms of making sure it better represents our communities and society at large. I just wonder whether any of the projects we've spoken about or anyone in the room had any thoughts around those kind of pathway opportunities, which I think is a really important way of building future audiences, but also future builders of these spaces. Is there any reflections on pathway opportunities from anyone in the room? Go on, Joanne.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I think it's really embedded in the kind of work we're trying to do in Salford across the historic environment. And in particular, we know that there is a lack of provision or certainly a restriction in the amount of provision in terms of even just general construction in the area that we're in now, because obviously Salford is seeing such a time of growth. And I think it is really important that we continue to support those very particular skills. And when we are at the point, and I am optimistic that we'll be at the point in the not too distant future that we are looking to protect things like the decorative plasterwork within the theatre, we will need specialist people, and we want to be able to make sure that we're drawing upon local people to be able to provide those jobs in the community generally. So yeah, it's very much high. It's very high on our agenda in terms of where we hope to get to.
Amazing. And Claire, you have a point?
Just a very quick one to say that I know it's something we've talked to many of the groups supporting theatres at risk, and I know Burnley Empire Trust have got a particular model which is looking at engaging with people to kind of skills learn as they're restoring the building as well. So it's definitely a skill that's been looked into by many groups.
And Michelle, we've got time for probably one question before we introduce Chris Bryant. So is there anything that's standing out in either your direct chat, or I see there's a couple in the main chat over here?
No, I'm just reading the chat. No, nothing's come through on the chat side of live.
There's one question which I think is a really ongoing and challenging question that's come a lot in my conversations today, is around potential sources of funding. The capital funding is really tight right now and really challenging. Are there any thoughts from the panel around the range of opportunities that we can think about it says here from philanthropy to government grants? Are there any thoughts on where people in the room who might be looking to raise small or large scale capital funding, where we should be putting our efforts? It's quite a big question. Is there anyone who wants to tackle that? Samantha?
I was just going to kind of add, because I touched on it kind of quite briefly, but we try and harness where possible regeneration kind of funding through kind of local plans, and we work with the sector to kind of preempt that kind of work. So, having the kind of data available around kind of asset need and community engagement need is really important, because then, at the kind of planning stage or the local plan stage, it's quite, it's a really good opportunity to tap into developer kind of contributions, and they have a huge impact, and that can kind of really help towards kind of capital costs. I would say that's quite a huge thing. And also in terms of being project ready, having these feasibility studies lined up. You never know when there's going to be initiative from central government in terms of infrastructure and money that can kind of support that kind of work. So I think it's about kind of preparation and being ready for, the inevitable. If money does come from above, being ready for it. That would be my suggestion.
I really appreciate it, and many people know my previous job was in working with the London Borough of Lambeth. I know there are some colleagues in the room. We've also just had a message from Mike in London Borough of Waltham Forest, thanking the Trust for its involvement with the Walthamstow Granada project, now reopening as under Soho Theatre's incredible leadership. And I think there's something around the like we know that funding is challenging for local authorities, and how we as Theatres Trust and our stakeholders can think about innovation in relation to local authority relationships. The idea of being project ready is really key, rather than responding last minute to a funding bid. And it feels like a challenging thing to do, but getting ourselves ready to bid when funding does become available, rather than only when funding becomes available, I think is a really key piece of advice. So thank you for our panelists. So Lucy, thank you very much. You've turned your camera off now. And Samantha, thank you very much for joining us. And Joanna as well as Theatres Trust team. Tom, we didn't get to speak. Thanks for joining us. Tom and Michelle and Claire and Sean. And by the magic of Zoom, I believe I am just left. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Chris Bryant, who is the Minister of State for Creative Industries, Arts and Tourism, who I think those three areas are... Hi, Chris. Are the key intersections that we've been discussing today. And I think theatre sits as a creative industry, an area of creative arts, expressing our arts, and also drives tourism to our towns and to our cities. So I will hand over to Chris Bryant.
Thanks very much, Josh, and many congratulations on your new role. You've just been referring to the fact that you were at Lambeth, and I knew that, and I'm sure that will stand you in good stead here at the Theatres Trust, which obviously we value at DCMS. I should say a little bit about my own love of theatre. I think the first time I achieved fame on American television was when I asked a question in the House of Commons in about 2002 or 3 about London theatre, the seats in London theatres, which were built for Victorian backsides rather than modern American backsides. Suddenly I was asked to appear on every single American news programme going. But obviously, it's actually quite a serious point about how do you make sure that the theatres that were built in the past are suitable for audiences of today and actually attractive and make for a good experience for people. And that's not just about, access to the bar and things like that, or decent toilets, or toilets that are as easily accessible for women as they are for men. All of those things matter of course. But there are some theatres that we could probably all know, where you can't really see anything from half of the seats. And so whilst Frank Matcham gave us many wonderful theatres up and down the land, nonetheless, the future of our theatre landscape is an important part of what government needs to be able to assist with, whether that's local government, regional government with the new mayors. Often they're taking a specific interest in creative industries and wanting to drive economic growth through the creative industries. And it's certainly true that having a live and active theatre in the middle of your town, whether it's a market town or in the middle of a city, can play an enormous part in giving that sense of pride to a local place. I was partly brought up in Cheltenham, and the Everyman in Cheltenham was a really important part of Cheltenham feeling it had a place in the world, and because it had its own proper repertory theatre. Now, things have changed for the Everyman in recent years, but nonetheless, I think that's important. We don't need to put everything in Aspic. I was at Firebird on Sunday night, which is a play that's on at the King's Head Theatre in Islington, which is no longer the old King's Head Theatre, which was at the back of the pub. I guess there was some kind of deal done with the council when the redevelopment of the area was done, and there's now a much better equipped basement theatre, black box kind of thing, and that kind of transition from the old theatre to the new theatre, making something newer and better, I think is the kind of thing, obviously, that we're all interested in. I know that there are theatres that really struggle for all sorts of reasons. Local authorities, as Josh, you've just referred to, have financial issues of their own. I'm not going to make any partisan points about that, but it's a simple fact that local authorities have struggled financially as more and more of their budgets have been taken up by social care rather than all the other things such as the arts and leisure and the non-statutory services that they provide. I'm very hopeful that the fact that we're now moving into a phase of having 3-year spending reviews rather than simply 1 year, it's going to provide more economic security and stability and certainty for local authorities, which might make them able to make better decisions in the kind of in the creative industries and the performing arts space. I don't know that I've got anything else specific to say, but I'm very happy to answer any kind of questions that people have. I guess you're moderating, are you, Josh? Are you in charge now?
I mean, I wasn't aware you were willing to take questions, so I'm more than happy to do some moderation. And actually, while maybe people warm up in the chat, I guess I have a question which I asked slightly earlier for the panel. And I know that your colleagues across government departments are looking at this around the intersection with Department of Health, the intersection with education, and trying to make sure that government departments are working less in silos. So what can we, as Theatres Trust and our stakeholders in the room, think about to make the case not just for culture, but across those areas around health, safer streets, net zero, that I know, and economic growth, I know are government priorities?
So the argument that I'm making very strongly from the department is that not least because Keir Starmer's quite right to say, look, stop working in silos all the time, government departments. For instance, one of our missions is an opportunity mission. You can't really talk about opportunity unless you're going to talk about creative education. So that is a relationship between the Department for Culture, Media and Sport and the Department for Education. Absolutely. And we in DCMS aren't going to be able to deliver it. It'd be DFE that has to deliver it. But we want to work on that strategy together. Likewise, we're working very closely with a series of different government ministers on the growth mission, because can you really have economic growth in a town or a village or a county unless you've got strong creative industries? I would argue you can't. 1 in 14 people work in the creative industries today. It's likely to be 1 in 10 in the next 5 or 10 years. So how are we going to work towards that? And you're quite right in relation to health as well. There's loads of evidence to suggest that whether it's art in hospitals or it's music in care homes or it's people having access to theatre, all of those things play a really important part in people's mental and other forms of health as well.
And the chat has gone oddly quiet. But if there's anyone who has a question for Chris Brantways with us, that'd be really great. But while I wait to see if anything else pops up on my screen, I'll ask you another question. So in relation to a number of our buildings that we've identified as at risk this year, what would you say to local communities who are trying to save that space or find a new future for it? What from your experience, you clearly are a theatre goer, what should local communities thinking about maybe in relation to campaigning or advocating? What was your advice to them?
I mean, in the end, a theatre, a bit like a church in a way, really, is nothing unless it's got an empty space with an actor walking across it, to quote Peter Brook, really. So the key thing is obviously having a programme of things that you want to put on. That is attractive and tells the kind of stories that people want to watch and see and participate in. Some buildings are really tough. They were built in an era when, you kind of liked a drafty window. And making them fit for a modern era is really, it can be very, very different, very difficult. I'm trying to work on what arts philanthropy looks like in the UK and whether there are things that we need to change to make it more, to incentivise more of it, and not just in London and the South East, but across the whole of the UK, because quite often it might be easier for the National Theatre or whatever to raise money than it is for the welfare in Uster-Gunlais or wherever it may be. So that's the kind of package that but in the end, you need a business plan, don't you? And you've got to be very conservative with a small c in drawing up your business plan, so that you're not being overly optimistic about how many people are going to come in and watch your one man production of Oedipus.
And I think that's an opportunity to promote the Theatres Trust, as well as advice on building sustainability, do provide business development advice. And as part of my background as well in business development for the sector, I'm really excited to take the industry on. We've now had a couple of questions, and I think you referenced philanthropy and the future of philanthropy. And there is a question, a very specific question that I'll rephrase slightly. It references community ownership funds and the Levelling Up funds, which I know were previous administration initiatives. And given the tight financial situation of the country, what is the opportunity we might see further down the line around similar funds that invest in cultural infrastructure for our communities? I know you can't commit to anything in this call, but what should we be looking out for?
Well, I hated the Levelling Up Fund and the Towns Fund and all of that, though the Muni in Pontypridd, which is just outside my patch, got some money and they've done an amazing refurb of it, cost several million, I think. I don't think we should return to that. We may be, we need to think about how we can best support, a whole series of buildings at risk, churches, other forms of heritage at risk, and theatres. But in the end, this is primarily about local and regional funds. I note that I think the mayors that I respect the most are the ones who are taking really constructive attitude towards trying to bring in investment into town centres to be able to develop creative industries more, and bringing that mixture of creative industries, so both performing arts, but many of which of course are subsidised, but also the commercial creative industries like video games and so on, because it's when you get that mix and you create that cluster or micro cluster of industries working together that it's most successful. And one of the worst things, it always seems to me, is when a building has only one use and is only used for 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day or whatever, whether it's a school or it's a theatre or whatever it is. So the more people can build in multi-use into spaces, the more profitable and sustainable they're likely to be.
And I think that idea of multi-use spaces in the future, and as we think as a trust about the future of these buildings, thinking about 24/7 use is really important. I'm going to combine one more question, if that's okay. It's sure. Around devolution, and it's also around planning. So there's a question that talks about the devolution impacts, positive and negative, and how we think that might impact saving theatres that are at risk. And then I think attached to that is something around planning approvals, which obviously is within local authority gift, and whether we can add community value as something that, I know assets of community value exist, but how do we build community value as a concept into planning decisions? So I guess it's devolution to the devolution bill and more powers to local decision making, and how we can think about community assets in planning.
Well, we're thinking about planning along with the Ministry for Housing and Local Government at the moment, because there's a whole series of things that we might want to do to free this up a little bit, so that it is preposterous when it takes 2 years to get a plan, a perfectly decent plan from the architect's office to actually starting pouring a bucket of cement. And because time is money and things deteriorate further in that time and all the rest of it. So that's one of the things that we're looking at in government. And secondly, I think devolution should be a good thing for in this space, because in the end, it's about pride of place. And, if you have a high street that's got a theatre in it, or a little community town that's got a theatre in it, it's a hub. It inspires pride. It engages the local community. I think that's all an asset, and that's what we should be, persuading every elected politician on local authorities and in the and regional mayors and so on, to work towards rather than to undermine.
Chris, that's really useful. Thank you. And you've stayed longer than I thought you had time for, so I really appreciate that. I know, looking at the chat, people are really grateful for your thoughts. And I think what you've said to close kind of wraps into where I began, which is although Theatres Trust exists almost 50 years ago in Act of Parliament to think about the fabric of our buildings over the evolution of our history and moving towards our 50th anniversary next year, it's really about that kind of the future of those spaces and the people and the communities and the high streets where these spaces sit. So I'm really looking forward to further conversations with you and all our stakeholders in the digital room today. So Chris, thank you for being our final guest on the event today.
Good luck with the job, Josh. I saw you asked earlier whether it was Sir Chris or just Chris, and I now think it's like Just Jack in Will and Grace. I am now Just Jack.
We'll take Just Chris. Great.
Cheers. Bye.
There we go. Some extra questions, unexpected, from Just Chris Bryant, Minister of State for Creative Industries, Arts and Tourism. So it just leaves me to thank everyone for coming today. We've covered a huge amount of ground. I hope it's been really useful. I certainly have learned a lot as I kind of settle into my role. I hope I get the opportunity to meet many of you either online or in person over the coming weeks and months. Please do reach out. I'd love the opportunity to hear about what you're doing in your local community. And make sure you amplify what you've heard today. We've got great, as we've said, press coverage. We were on Radio 4 this morning, as well as lots of regional and local news. There'll be lots of pieces on ITV local news from 6 p.m. this evening. So make sure you share and promote that, because the whole purpose of today's launch is not a one-off. It's to amplify this campaign across the year. And I just want to say a huge thank you to the incredible Theatres Trust team and our trustees who really do work tirelessly, not just in putting this event on, but through our Resilient Theatres, Resilient Communities programme across the year. And if you don't know what the Trust does, do reach out, and also make sure you let others know what we're doing, because we are there to make sure this sector, this ecosystem can grow and thrive. And I'm really excited about the future. So one point that came up earlier was around data and evaluation. So hopefully we're about to share a QR code on the screen and also put a link in the chat to our evaluation. It's really important for us as we grow that we can evaluate our work properly to make the case for the sector. So if you're on a phone, scan that QR code. It will take you to a SurveyMonkey. We'll also pop it in the chat now. It's in there. I know evaluations can feel laborious. We've tried to make it simple and accessible, but the more detail you can give us about this event, but also what more events you'd like, it helps me and our team make the case for the funding that might be required and other kind of work we need to champion. So I really implore you, and we'll be following up with email as well, to fill in our evaluation form. It shouldn't take too long, but it's a really vital piece of data gathering for us. So scan that QR code now, follow the link in the chat if you haven't got your phone with you, and we'll follow up via email. And it's been a real pleasure to spend my Tuesday afternoon with you in this room. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.